is the Ontario Trillium Foundation's Collective Impact Granting Stream webinar on the Common Agenda with Sylvia Cheuy. This webinar will help guide your collective impact work around building a common agenda. What factors that you will need to consider when developing your common agenda. Thank you all so much for joining today. I'd like to introduce Sylvia, who is the Director of Deepening Community. Sylvia Cheuy is passionate about the community engagement and the unique role that citizens play in creating dynamic and well-connected neighborhoods and communities. She delights in delivering learning opportunities that profile, disseminate, and share the resources, tools, and experiences to Tamarack's vast network of learners, primarily via the Tamarack Deepening Community Learning Center. I'll now turn it over to Sylvia.
Thanks so much, Steph. Good afternoon, everyone. So today's webinar is really focused on the common agenda. I'm going to assume that most of you on the call have a fairly good basic understanding of collective impact as a whole, but I am going to sort of go over a few things just to ground us all in how the common agenda fits within the broader idea of collective impact. I really then want to spend some time with you all learning about how the common agenda unfolds. It really is one of those pieces that are the work that's a high focus of attention in the early days of developing a collective impact effort, for sure, but also we'll speak a little bit to how that the notion of your common agenda is likely to evolve and shift over time and as the phases of your work unfold. And then ultimately what I want to do is also give you some concrete examples and also some tangible resources and tools that we often use when we're working with groups who are undertaking the work of defining their common agenda. So for those of you who are just kind of climbing in, as many of you know, the concept of collective impact was really made well known by John Kania and Mark Kramer of the group FSG in the US. And they wrote an article in 2011 in the Stanford Social Innovation Review that describes collective impact from their perspective. I think for me the keys just to keep front and center around collective impact is, yes, it's a form of working collaboratively. Secondly, that it really emphasizes working across a diversity of sectors. And thirdly, it focuses on agreement across that diversity of players around what is the common issue that you want to work on together, and also some agreement around the path forward around how you're going to do that work. So a couple other things. Because of its growing popularity, there's lots of folks kind of flying fast and loose with their interpretations of what collective impact looks like on the ground and in the context of our day-to-day work. I personally am a bit of a purist around this stuff. I do think that well-established collaboratives can, in fact, evolve their work to include a collective impact frame, but that's not always necessary, and it's not all. And collaborations in and of themselves aren't automatically collective impact efforts. So for me, some of the things that really distinguish collective impact as a form of collaboration I've spoken about. You know, it really is not focused on a single sector, and it really, I think, the other key piece is encourages all the players to absolutely look and think about how they better align existing programs and services, but ultimately has a view that goes beyond simply trying to create a programmatic solution to a complex issue, and also encourages the group to consider how the system needs to change to better affect the issue that you care about. And then, not surprisingly, because of that, it has a really good long-term focus. So we've talked in the past, not only that are there 5 conditions of collective impact as identified by Kania and Kramer, but there's also 3 preconditions. And I think for me, the 3 preconditions are relevant when you think about the collective impact common agenda, because having those influential champions kind of secured and engaged in helping you to define your common agenda is a critical element of its success. Absolutely. Looking assessing the urgency of the issue and or how to frame your issue in a way that creates a greater sense of urgency, that's important groundwork that also, you'll see, has an impact on how you might shape and articulate your growing common agenda. And this piece on adequate resources, I mean, I think one of the big strengths of OTF's collective impact grant stream is that for the first time it provides us folks in Ontario with a dedicated pool of resources that enable us to do this groundwork of convening and iterating and exploring a potential common agenda. And I think that that's an incredible gift. And I think the funding in and of itself probably is not enough. You need the strong commitment of a number of key leaders to really help lead the process forward and reach and build consensus across your community around your emerging common agenda. So just to anchor the notion of the common agenda within the broader context of the 5 conditions of collective impact, you'll see that it's written there. And I think for us, you know, the stuff in blue is really critical. Developing the common agenda, a strong and compelling one, really requires the engagement of diverse voices and perspectives. It needs to be something that is sort of both defined but also responsive and adaptive to input. So you can almost always expect that your common agenda is going to go through a number of iterations, I think, before the group as a whole or the leadership of the effort really feel like they've nailed it. And lastly, and we'll talk about this a little bit in more depth throughout this webinar, it's critical to not only have your common agenda be an articulation of the shared vision that you across your diversity of players is committed to working on together, and also including sort of your articulation of the joint approach that you're committing to address it. But I think what we've learned is how critical it is to also be able to frame the common agenda through an aspirational or positive lens. We find that using that kind of aspirational language or articulating what you're trying to do more as a hope as opposed to just a problem can be critical in motivating and sustaining engagement around your effort overall. So I'm not going to go through the other 4 conditions in more depth, but they are there so you can sort of see. And the last thing I will say before moving more deeply into the common agenda is that in our experience, you need to be working at and advancing all 5 of these conditions together. It's not okay, you know, we find though it might be tempting to kind of cherry pick one of the 5 and really focus your energies there. To really kind of mobilize and sustain positive change over time, all 5 of these conditions have to be sort of developed and thought through. So the common agenda, really, it is an articulation across your diverse players around the challenge that you want to work on together. I think some of the other things that we found useful is explaining why it is that we believe that working collaboratively and collectively across diverse sectors and making a long-term commitment to addressing the issue is something that makes sense. Beyond that common agenda itself, the group needs to be able to define and articulate some clear and shared goals for change to make it concrete and tangible for folks. And then as well, because you are such a diverse group coming together, the common agenda also asks the players to be really clear, not just about what you're going to do, but also how you're committing to work together with one another as you go on this journey. And so being able to identify principles that will guide your joint work, I think can also be an important component of a robust common agenda. All right, so here's an example of a common agenda, and this is one that I happen to know very well. It features the work of Headwaters Communities in Action, which is a diverse, comprehensive, citizen-led effort engaging multiple sectors that focuses action on community well-being. And I was instrumental in establishing Headwaters Communities in Action before coming on board to Tamarack. So one of the things that we really struggled with was beginning to define and make sense for our community about what it was we really meant when we were talking about community well-being. So one of the first tasks that our diverse working group really undertook was that graphic that you see in the top left corner, which is our articulation of what we saw as the 5 core pillars that contributed to community well-being. And under each, though you can't see it very well, there are 2 or 3 descriptive bullets that help people understand what we mean when we're talking about each one of the pillars. So fairly early on in the work of Headwaters Communities in Action, there was a commitment that what we really needed, among other things, was a bit of a community well-being report, a bit of a status update on where are we with respect to these dimensions of community well-being. So using that frame of the 5 pillars, we then went out and spent a lot of time undertaking a citizen survey. And while we asked a number of core questions, I think the 2 most pivotal questions that were central for us anyway in beginning to refine our common agenda around community well-being was asking folks to talk about what were 3 things that they absolutely loved about living in our region, and secondly, what were 3 things that they thought we ought to be really focused on or concerned about if we wanted to sustain our high quality of life. And from that, we got all kinds of input that ultimately enabled us anyway to take those 5 pillars and articulate them a bit more in a bit more detail around 11 core areas. So what we were able to do was sort of do a bit of a story around where each one of those 11 topic areas was, what it meant, 2 or 3 data points that had relevance for the community that helped us assess where we were at in terms of each one of them, and how that compared with other communities and or with the province. And ultimately, because we really believed in that importance of aspiration, we really worked hard as well to collect stories that we could feature in each one of these 11 topic areas that illustrated an innovative initiative that was bubbling somewhere within our region that was already showing that positive work was occurring around some of these themes, to give people ideas and opportunities to better link up their efforts. So in terms of the common agenda and the work of articulating what it is we're about, these 5 questions were developed by the White House Council on Community Solutions when they began their work around what they call Opportunity Youth, which were the folks across the U.S. under 30 that were neither employed nor in training and education. And they very quickly, as a group, recognized that in order to advance action on their agenda, they really needed to embrace collective impact as a framework to help them move forward. And in articulating what that commitment really meant, these 5 questions, I think, do an excellent job of beginning to kind of create a shared understanding of not just the focus on the topic area that you are all concerned about, but helps to make more concrete and real the kind of commitment that you're making not only to one another, but also to your approach to resolving your issue. As I said earlier, because you are such a diverse group, ideally, that's coming together, and many of you may not have ever worked together before, building trust and shared understanding both about the issue and about each other becomes a real piece of foundational work in the development of your common agenda. And being able then to explore what's really critical and important as principles to guide your work is important for not only your working group and your leadership group, but I think it's also important to be really transparent about as you set out to articulate not only what you're doing, but how you intend to work and how the way you're working is fundamentally different than the way things have maybe unfolded in the past. So what's listed above here are just 6 possible kind of values and principles that we have found tend to show up and resonate with folks who are embracing a collective impact effort. Not saying that those are the ones you have to work with, but it does give you a useful starting point, so you're not necessarily starting with a blank piece of paper. And then, so you've got, as you're beginning to define your common agenda, you're beginning to articulate the shared problem or issue that you want to work on together. You are articulating the values and principles that are going to guide how you work together. And then ultimately, And iteratively, the leadership group of your effort needs to really spend some time getting very concrete and tangible about the specific goals for change that you intend to meet, or that you will be monitoring progress around in order to evaluate your effectiveness at meeting your common agenda. So there you'll see just 5 of those central questions that we find that the leadership group of a collective impact effort need to come back to time and again, just to continue to clarify where are we, what are we learning, how are we defining the target group we hope to serve, how are we articulating our issue, what specifically are the changes that we're hoping to affect or advance, concretely what are the measures and or indicators that we're successful, and what kind of a timeline are we putting on this. Now those look like pretty obvious and straightforward questions, but in my experience I think, it is not uncommon for it to take up to 18 months, 12 to 18 months to really kind of land on a common agenda that's both compelling and also clear, concrete, and tangible, as well as having strong buy-in and support across the diversity of your community. And really, the work of refining your common agenda is very much like peeling an onion. So I suspect that as you go out about this work, you will be coming back to core questions like these 5 again and again and again, and absolutely expecting that over time, your answers to those questions will become clearer and or may shift and change as new perspectives are added and new information is pulled in. So the next big challenge is, as though kind of getting alignment and agreement across a diversity of core players and reaching a critical kind of consensus on what your issue is and how you intend to work together. The next big challenge around the common agenda is then how do you powerfully communicate what it is that your group has intending to do quickly, succinctly, and in a way that folks of various abilities and languages can actually look at and clearly define. We find that visuals are, in particular, a very effective way to give voice to your common agenda. If you can put a picture on a page and keep it to one page, but I use it as a way of illustrating what you envision the changes that you're trying to create and some of those core elements that are central to how you're going to get there, you'll find this to be really useful. So just so you know, the picture there comes from a workshop that I led with a group that was doing a lot of work with First Nations communities in Middlesex County. And for them, they explained to us that the turtle has real symbolic value within many of the First Nations traditions. So they used that centrally and then built services around the families that they were trying to serve within their community. And also you'll see sort of their principles were sort of the legs and the tail of the turtle, and then the actual range of services and activities that would go into supporting a family by a variety of different players was articulated on the outside. So that was just one really good example. Here's another one. So for those of you who know Liz Weaver, our colleague, prior to joining Tamarack, as you know, she headed up the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. And one of the things that's really interesting for them was when they initially began their work, they were trying to convene conversations around poverty in Hamilton. And not surprisingly, there were few people who actually wanted to come out and talk about it when it was framed that directly. So as they stepped back and thought about what is it we have to be doing differently to mobilize people and to pull people into powerful conversations about our work, they went back to their data, which revealed that an overwhelming majority of folks in Hamilton who were living in poverty were children. So as you'll see at the top, there's a perfect example of how the power of an aspiration or a positive vision, making Hamilton the best place to raise a child, was something that was compelling and mobilizing in a way that just straightforward talking about poverty reduction didn't have the effect that they were hoping for. But over time, and after they did successfully begin to engage people, one of the things that they recognized, and you can see it in the circles across the top, is that there were already collaboratives meeting around many of the core issues that would need to be aligned if one were serious about making Hamilton the best place to raise a child. And so the work of the round table then really became very much around helping each one of those existing collaboratives both align their work, but also take and apply effectively a lens of poverty to better understanding some of the issues that they themselves were working to advance. So the role of the roundtable was really as a catalyst and also as sort of like a central point to track initiatives' progress and help folks to see their work within the context of a bigger frame around poverty reduction. Here's a different vision. So I'm pulling these all forward because I really want you to see there's no end to the way in which folks have tried to articulate the comprehensiveness of complex work in ways that's both compelling and easy to understand. So this initiative is an initiative out of California that really is focused almost at the neighborhood level. It includes 500 blocks and 5 square miles. And really their focus is around making their community one where everyone works together so that everyone lives well and prospers. So you'll see they've kind of identified for themselves the 4 kind of anchors around that. And they've actually used the roots to really talk about their principles, and they've rooted it very much in a specific and particular place. So here's another one. So this comes from a project around racial equity in the state of Alaska, and this initiative is called Endor, and it's really statewide, and it really is focused on racial healing, not unlike some of the work that's now underway here at home around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But really, at the end of the day, they really see their work as to reset and reshape a dialogue on race across the state and bring people together to challenge perceptions, host community conversations, and raise awareness in ways that are healing around issues of race and racism. And then really to move from there to also advance a common policy agenda. Here's another one. So this is from a project called Arise Alaska, which is really focused on working within the First Nations communities and moving through the whole continuum of one's life, from toddler, child, youth, to adult and elder. And you'll see here they've kind of talked about sort of the scope of their work. They really talk about sort of the 3 core audiences for their work and acknowledge that there are 3 levels of work that need to happen and be fostered in a positive way to kind of create the aims that they're striving for. And you'll see, so that if that's sort of their overarching common agenda, this one's useful because what you'll see here is how they've then taken that meta kind of common agenda and begun then to move to the next layer of concreteness around defining the goals that they are committed to achieving, which I like because they're really, really tangible. And then they take it down one more level where they're saying, okay, if these are the goals of our project, then these are the specific metrics or measures that we are going to be monitoring to enable us to assess and evaluate our success. And I think the other thing that I really like about this framing is you'll see that they're starting to go very public in defining their work, even though, you know, you'll see in that culture frame, they acknowledge they still have some work to do to begin to articulate and define what success would look like. So they're not waiting until everything's all shiny and polished before putting it out there and using that iteratively to test and build support for what they're trying to do. All right, so if that's kind of the theory that we're thinking about with respect to collective impact, I now just want to introduce you to a very practical tool which we at Tamarack use a lot when we're working with groups who are at a place where they're working to define their common agenda. And as way of context before introducing the tool, I think the thing that's really critical to remember is that the local context of where the work will be unfolding is really critical to think about and talk about at the leadership level, because what your local context looks like is instrumental in helping to shape how the common agenda unfolds in your community. So some of the things that you should look at and think about in terms of assessing the context that your common agenda is going to unfold in are listed there. So, is there a pressing issue? That this brings in the precondition around urgency, like where is this at? And have we been able to effectively galvanize a significant number of leaders across sectors to work together on it? What's the data telling us? How can we, what measures make the most sense to help people understand the scope and scale of the issue within the context of your community? Where is your community at? What level of interest and awareness do they have about your issue? It could very well be that your issue is a critical one, but people's awareness level around it is very low. And so as part of the work of advancing your common agenda, a lot of the beginning work will require you to kind of go out there and do a lot of community engagement and community awareness building around the issue as a whole. Do you have or have you been able to kind of start with a core group of leaders who are committed to working together? And are you able, through your process of developing and testing a common agenda, expand and grow that core group? Is there a convener? Like, who's the one that's holding this work as it is still forming? This could be the group that, does the work in between hosting gatherings so that input is taken in and integrated and refined into the evolving picture of the issue as you're beginning to articulate it, and also perhaps sort of be the glue that gets stuff done in between meetings, can also be the holder of some of the early money to advance this work. And then ultimately, one of the big issues always is not only engaging your community in a variety of ways, but also sort of even putting boundaries around what is the geographic area that you are intending to serve as you move forward. And sometimes that can be clear and easy because your mandates, the boundaries of your service delivery areas are fairly clear, but in other situations it can be less clear. So here is the tool that we often use when we're working with groups. Normally what happens is sort of for us, after framing not only collective impact as a whole, but really talking about the common agenda as one of those specific 5 conditions, we invite groups. Ideally we find, if it's at all possible, to try and, in a large group, use it as a bit of a microcosm of the community as a whole. Hopefully the folks in the room will be a fairly diverse mix. And what you're really working for at the small group level is to make sure that you don't have folks that already know each other from the same sector all sitting together, that the richness of learning and insight comes from ensuring that the folks who are sitting around a small table helping to sort of think about and talk about this opportunity have the benefit of experiencing the power of diverse perspectives as well. But ultimately, this tool comes from work advanced by the Kellogg Foundation. And what we really like about it is that not that you have to follow the numbers in sequence, because you don't, but what you really want to do is make sure that in those small groups, you spend some time allowing people to have rich conversations about each one of these 6 dimensions. And if they can make their way around this framework, what's powerful is it allows them to build shared understanding, but also explore their potential common agenda from a diversity of perspectives and begin this critical work of building and growing consensus. So assuming that we are going to follow through and use this linearly or circularly following the numbers, you begin by asking folks to articulate as best they can the problem, issue, or opportunity that they think needs to be addressed or that they share in common. And that can take a while, And not all groups will necessarily articulate the same thing, and that's okay. The second box, community needs and assets, this is where you're tapping the collective knowledge of the folks in the room, and you're asking them to help you, with that context, some of those context questions from the previous slide. You're getting them to share with you, what some of the needs are in the community that are illustrative of the problem, issue, or opportunity that they've named. But then I think equally importantly, you want to encourage people to name some of the assets that are already present in the community that are in some way tending to this issue. So those assets could be existing programs and services. It could be knowledge. It could be, 3 or 4 previous reports that have been done and perhaps shelved but are completely relevant and have done some good groundwork to better understand the issue or opportunity. It can be a whole host of things. So what you really want people to do there is begin to help you map the current system around this issue. Where are the resources? What work has already been done? And what articulation of needs are already out there that help affirm and confirm the issue or opportunity as you guys see it. So box number 3 is really that chance for folks to move beyond the problem or opportunity and really begin, this is sort of that work that will help influence the articulation of perhaps an aspiration around your common agenda. So you're asking people to both help you kind of describe from their perspective some of the desired results that they would want to see achieved by working together on your common agenda. And also you'll see from this box, perhaps it'll be a blend of perhaps some of the aspirational stuff, but also maybe some hints around some specific goals that your common agenda is committed to achieving over time. So that's where it starts to get concrete and practical. So if there's a problem, issue, or opportunity, what are the tangible things that we think need to happen or that we would like to see done to move forward and advance progress on the issue? Number 4, the influential factors. This is really interesting because what it does is it asks folks to name some of the things that can be happening in the broader environment that while the group may not have a lot of control over, may certainly present some opportunities that the group needs to be aware of and or take advantage of. So some of the things that concretely would be examples for me of perhaps influential factors. One would be sort of municipal, provincial, and federal election cycles. What do we know? And where are the opportunities then for us to target some awareness work around influencing some of the upcoming political changes that might happen. Other things often can be, a good news story or even, unfortunately, sort of a tragedy that's linked to the problem or issue. When those kinds of things happen, there's a moment in the public awareness when there might be a more compelling desire for action, and that while you can't control as a group when those things happen, if you're looking for them and watching for them, then you're well positioned to seize those opportunities when they show up. It also serves as a reminder, I think, that for all of you, that while you're creating a bit of a strategy for how you want to work together to advance positive progress on your issue, it reminds us all that we're not in control of all the factors, and that means that from time to time we may need to adapt, change, and refine our strategy as the world around us shifts and changes. Number 5 are the concrete specific strategies that we would envision. What is the work that we're actually going to do together that is going to generate the desired results that we seek and therefore positively impact our issue or opportunity? So this is, again, another opportunity for folks to begin to move to higher levels of concreteness around the scope and the scale which you want to work together around your common agenda. And then finally, the 6th box is really an opportunity for your group to make transparent some of the assumptions that are embedded in your own ways of thinking. Because almost always, as the work continues to unfold and as a group begins to take action around its common agenda, the feedback that you get from the community and from your data will lead you to either affirm that some of your assumptions are correct or may ask you to challenge some of the long-held assumptions that you've made around a particular issue. And that's where I think a lot of the power comes for a group working together in this way to maybe capitalize on net new solutions that none of them would have been able to imagine had they been continuing to work in isolation on this issue. So that is sort of a roadmap around how this dialogue tool works. Typically what we do is give folks a good, healthy amount of time in small groups, maybe 30 minutes even, to kind of begin to articulate and work their way through this dialogue tool, and then share some of the highlights and ahas that that conversation has generated to the whole, so people get to have a sense of some emerging consensus across the broader group. Other ways that we've seen this used is that sometimes if there's been a lot of groundwork done in advance of a big convening, like we're imagining, the lead group may actually put in the center what they believe to be the problem, issue, or opportunity, and name it already, and then invite folks to do a dialogue around the other pieces, and then come back around and see whether or not the articulation of the issue or opportunity is valid, or whether they would recommend a refinement around it. So lots of different ways to use it. But I think, again, the value is in the wholeness that following the 6 steps really encourages people to attend to in their conversation. So there you go. That, in a nutshell, is my presentation around a common agenda. And I look forward to any comments, questions, ahas, insights that you may have around your own work with Common Agenda.
Thank you, Sylvia, for sharing your insights and perspectives. The Common Agenda is really crucial in building your collective impact project, and you gave some great tools and ideas, and I have shared that tool, the last tool that you use. I did share that on Twitter, so you can dive into that a little bit more deeper if you want. So now it's question and answer time, and on your panel there you can insert your questions into the questions and I will read them out. And while we're waiting, somebody had sent a question in earlier. Mm-hmm. Sylvia, about technology use. So she asks about how to use technology to communicate between all partners within the collaborative. Does the use of enterprise social networks shorten the time to reach a common agenda? And her background is that mostly they use email and conference calls. And so she's like, would Yammer and Slack and other kind of chat apps improve? Do you have any comments?
There's a couple of things that come up for me. I mean, I think one of the things I do love about your question is really kind of helping us to exactly break out of some of the more traditional ways of engaging folks and really challenge ourselves to leverage all the technologies. One of the challenges or questions that that you need to really be mindful about, I think, when you're working with technology to gather input, and I think it can be fabulous, is that you may not you get different audiences. Different audiences are sort of more familiar with different technology platforms. So just needing to know the unique context of the group that you're working with or the community that you're working in. Are there 2 or 3 sort of social networking platforms that are more used than others? That would be one thing. You know, I've seen, for example, some of the community foundations, thinking out west in particular, were partnered up with TELUS and used a phone app I think, very effectively to gather input and data from young people when they were having a lot of difficulty getting their voices integrated and heard within the more traditional methods of engaging community input. So I think, that's another piece that can be really useful. Those online surveys, like for us in developing the Community Wellbeing Report in Headwaters, I think being able to have people fill out surveys and give us data, that was a core piece. And then what was interesting was, the demographic spread that we were able to gather was actually reflective of a microcosm of the population distribution across the broader region that we were working in. So that felt like a really good affirmation, but we couldn't rely solely on it. We actually also had to augment it with things like focus groups and things. And then lastly, I think one of the other places where I've seen technology used really effectively in some of this, some of the convening and meetings around developing a common agenda are some of those, they're voting, they're like almost like polling data. So you can ask in the moment sort of check-in questions, and everyone in the room, you can use their cell phones then to vote on where they are at in terms of an issue. And so you can get an instant visual on a screen of sort of the consensus that may or may not be emerging across your room. So there's another way in which I've seen technology really be used effectively in helping to mobilize and build consensus. But ultimately, I think, particularly around the work of the Common Agenda, it is iterative, but it is always that tension between wanting to solicit a diversity of perspectives and then always listening and looking for where does the consensus seem to be emerging. And if there are sort of divergent perspectives showing up, I think the other piece where, it's important for validation, and this is perhaps another place where technology could be useful, would be around those points of diversity. Is there anything that's emerging across the whole that folks within the group could not live with if it was included within part of the emerging common agenda? So you want to know sort of what do you agree around, and of the things that people have said, is there anything within this emerging common vision that you wouldn't feel comfortable supporting if things move forward? Those are sort of the two core questions. Okay, is there another question or comment kind of bubbling for folks?
There are a few. So what happens if you come across a roadblock in your core group that threatens to sideline your common agenda?
Ooh, fabulous question. What your question actually reminds me of is some work that I learned about around, it was from Tillamook County in Oregon, which is a rural part of Oregon, the state of Oregon, and they actually began to build a common agenda around the issue of teen pregnancy, because in fact their data showed that their results were 3 times above the state average in terms of incidence of teen pregnancy. And they recognized that individually organizations were having minimal effectiveness and that they really needed a more comprehensive and consistent approach across them all. So that was sort of the thing that drew them together. They spent an inordinate amount of time, as you can imagine, months and months and months, sort of building consensus and beginning to get really clear around what their common agenda was. And then, of course, they did their big reveal where they said that their common agenda was about eliminating teen pregnancy. The moment it was articulated that way, the faith community network that was really strong in Tillamook County had to withdraw their support, because the way that the common agenda was articulated actually looked as though what it was doing was encouraging abortion. And they, because of the political stand that the faith network had taken, didn't feel that they could support that. So I think what was useful and helpful was that there was enough trust and respect built through the process that they could articulate their concern and the tension. And then the group as a whole, the leadership group as a whole, really held and owned that tension alongside them, recognizing that their network and the resources that they brought to the table were absolutely essential if folks in Tillamook County were really serious about addressing the issue. They went back and did some more work and came out and said that what they were going to do was reduce the incidence of teens becoming parents or something like that. And when it was worded in that way, I'm not exactly, the language isn't exactly what they said, but it was close enough. What it enabled was it articulated in such a way that it enabled a lot of the faith networks approaches around preventing teen pregnancy or preventing the early kind of preventing the teens from sort of getting sexually active earlier. And they're, I forget the word for it, it's a common word, but it's slipping me. It enabled them to enable their agenda and their approaches to be embraced within the broader effort. So I think, it is, I think it's key that the leadership of your group feels comfortable enough that those points of tension can be named, because each one of the folks that are actively involved in your effort actually often is representative of a broader constituency, and so you got to really listen and hear each other. And if there is a place where someone says, I cannot move forward with this, I think it's a real opportunity for the group not to lose hope and bail on the whole process, but actually see it as an invitation to pause and share that issue or tension together and see if there's not a creative way to articulate it in a way that can invite the multitude of perspectives that you need. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think we have time for one more question. I will let everyone know that I will post all the questions, and I'm quickly typing up the answers. And the ones we don't get to, I will talk to Sylvia about, and we will come up with some answers. And then the follow-up emails, we'll post them. So the last question is, in building a common agenda, how do you balance the need for consensus with the need for efficiency and ambitious goals? So she kind of...
Yeah. This is where that that bamboo analogy really comes through for me. That you really can't, I don't think, shortchange the time it really takes to build shared understanding and shared ownership around an issue. Because it is about, those relationships are so critical over time to a sustainable and effective common agenda and collective impact effort. So, I would say it really does depend on the context. So if maybe there have been 3 or 4 earlier attempts to work collaboratively on a particular issue, it could be that you can move along more quickly because there's been some solid groundwork that predated this particular iteration around your common agenda. But I think, it's more of an intuitive gut feel. On the one hand, you want to make sure that that you can illustrate and demonstrate the multitude of efforts in which you have worked hard to gain diverse perspectives, and not just invite people to meetings, but actually demonstrate how you've gone out to existing groups and met with them on their turf and in their time to talk about your issue. And then I think you have to listen for that consensus that is starting to emerge and mirror it back, but then you also need to, I think, frame it in a way that people are able to say, you know what, I agree with 80% of this, but these 2 things I cannot live with. You really need to invite them, if they're resisting or feeling like they can't support your common agenda, not to bail, but to take the time to sort of listen and unpack. Are there specific elements that they're saying no to, or is it the whole thing? So that's sort of one thing. And then I think you're right. You won't ever get 100% sort of buy-in and commitment and passion around an issue. And so you kind of have to design your collective impact effort so that that your community engagement is sort of always ongoing and your door is always open to include and invite new voices and perspectives, because it could be an issue of readiness and different groups being ready at different times for lots of other external reasons that have nothing to do with your common agenda. So you need to be open and welcoming. But at the same time, I think you will get a bit of a sense when you've got a critical enough mass of diverse perspectives and momentum and excitement behind you that you feel like you could move forward on some concrete projects and initiatives that will help kind of put meat on the bones of your common agenda. And again, you know, I think almost always your common agenda reflects a big, audacious, complex community issue. And so there's also always a tension as you move forward that in the broad articulation of your common agenda, when you move into action, some of the initiatives or projects that you initially embrace might be very focused in micro and not reflective of the whole enchilada, and that's fine. It is that tension you have to hold, and you say to your community at large, this is a starting point where we are going to begin to take some shared action together around this issue. Is it the end? Is this the only thing we're going to do? No. But at the same time, if you don't zero in and choose some concrete, tangible places where you can begin to experiment and work together differently, you will never kind of build the momentum and excitement and progress you need to sustain commitment to your common agenda and collective impact effort over time. So it's kind of a paradox, right? You want to always hold the big picture, you want to always allow people to come in, and then you also have to trust when you have enough of a critical mass of support and enough insight into some potential concrete opportunities for action that you can safely start to move forward and know that it isn't going to be the be-all, end-all, but it's the beginning. Does that make sense?
It does. And you know, I find that it is those relationship building. And you know, one of the questions was about how do we connect through technology, and I think the building the relationships with the one-on-ones, really, like going to people's meetings and going on their agendas and listening to what they're wanting and their goals and objectives, and you know, doing that groundwork is really helpful in building that trust.
Yep, for sure. And I think, you know, the other piece that you've just sort of reminded me of, I think, is how critical it is to the early stage of an effort and ongoing to be always thinking about how do you build your contact list, your database of people that you've touched and talked to. Because the other place where we found technology to be hugely useful is, as you know, because this work is so iterative, while the work is unfolding, you also have to be regularly communicating and sharing updates of progress and momentum, because it could be some time between the time you initially engage an individual and the time that the common agenda is ultimately landed on and action begins. So, you know, you want to leverage the use of technology and databases to help you make sure that you're continuing to communicate with folks over time.
Yeah, and you're not wanting people to constantly come to you, that you are making the effort to go to them.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. All right, so there is a bunch of questions. So like I said, I will put them in an email, and we'll have some answers for them. So next we have OTF, who is going to talk a little bit about the Ontario Trillium Foundation's granting stream for collective impact. So I'll pass it over.
Hi, Thea. Welcome.
Hi there. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Let's just pop to the first OTF slide. You can hear me because the slide changed. Great. And I'm only going to take about 2 minutes of your time here. First, I know there are a lot of people on the line, and I don't have any idea how familiar folks are with OTF. I imagine a lot of you are, but just in case, I just wanted to do a quick recap of who we are. And OTF is an agency of the province of Ontario, and our mission is to build healthy, vibrant communities throughout the province. And we do that through kind of building the capacity of the voluntary sector via investments in community-based initiatives. And we invest in about 1,000 organizations every year. We're the largest granting foundation in Canada, and over the next decade, we will roughly invest $1 billion in Ontario. And if anyone is not familiar with OTF and wants to learn more, by all means, please go to our website. Pop to the next slide. And as folks know on the line, we do have a relatively new collective impact granting stream. This has been part of our redesign that we've gone through over the last couple of years and allows OTF as a foundation to really help bring about fundamental change through collective action and start to invest in some of these deeper, more complex systems change initiatives. Again, more information is on our website, and I imagine people on the line here have been participating in some of the earlier webinars and possibly workshops as well. So OTF is investing in essentially in 3 stages, recognizing the complexity of collective impact and the kinds of things, yeah, no, you can go to the last slide, that's fine. And the kinds of things that Sylvia was just talking about, that it takes time to develop a common agenda and get people around the table. So we've recognized this complexity and have designed a program that allows us to invest in 3 stages. The first is called Define the Impact, which is kind of a really early groundwork, convening, figuring it out stage. The second is Organize for Impact, which, you know, when certain ducks are in a row and the foundational blocks are in place, this stage allows an investment to really organize and build the plan. And then finally, we are able to invest in a stage we're calling Deliver for Impact, which is that fulsome, deep implementation of the collective impact initiative over several years. I'm not going to go into detail on each of these stages right now. Information is going to be coming soon to a website near you. So right now, if you go onto OTF's website and click into the collective impact granting stream, the information is a little bit out of date. So the stages that are on there are not going to jive with what I've just spoken about. That will be changed very shortly. So I would just ask you to check back frequently, and the updated information will be on our website soon. And in the meantime, if you have questions or you have a collective working on an initiative and you want to explore whether it may or may not fit with our collective impact stream, call our support center. The contact information should be on your screen, or send Naulo and his email. Naulo is our coordinator of collective impact, and his email is on your screen. You can get in touch with Naulo. Or if you do have a relationship with the local OTF office, you can contact the program manager and start a dialogue there. So that's pretty much all I wanted to go over right now. Please visit the website and follow up on the contact information, and then we'll go from there. Back to you guys.
Thanks, Leah.
If you go to the next slide, the last thing I just wanted to bring to your attention is that, well, first of all, Tamarack actually has a new website. And so I would really encourage you to go there. It's really interactive. We've got 5 new streams, some great resources, and it's really easy to navigate. But on that website, you will find our upcoming 5-day event, the Community Change Institute in Toronto. And if you, I think it would actually be applicable to everybody on this call, because you will learn from your peers around collective impact and around community engagement and an evaluation. And it is 5 days of head-cramming, people-meeting event. So I would really encourage you to go there. And we have some webinars coming up. The shared measurement webinar and the one-day workshop, if you're able to travel to Calgary, Upside Down Thinking, Disrupting the Status Quo. So if you go onto our website, that's where we post all of our free webinars and our upcoming events. And it is 1 o'clock. So I just wanted to thank Sylvia for doing an amazing presentation on the Common Agenda. And thank you for participating. And there will be some follow-up emails, and we will send you the recording in case you want to share it or if people missed it. So thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.